Charles Ponzi, the infamous swindler whose empty promises of unreal returns on investments gave us the concept of the Ponzi scheme. My name is David, and today we'll learn how Charles Ponzi, a poor Italian immigrant, convinced so many people to trust him with their life savings, only to be burned when his scheme collapsed, costing investors the equivalent of $242 million in today's money. Our story begins in 1903 when Charles Ponzi arrived at Boston. He was born in Lugo, Italy, and immigrated to the U.S. with hopes of getting rich. He landed at Boston Harbor with only $2.50 in his pocket. He had gambled his life savings on board the voyage from Italy. Ponzi was a bright fellow. He quickly learned English and got a job as a dishwasher at a restaurant. He was promoted to waiter, but was subsequently fired for shortchanging the customers and theft. In 1907, after struggling in the US, he moved up to Montreal, Canada, where he got a job as a teller at Bank Zerosi, a new bank geared towards the waves of Italian immigrants pouring into the country. Ponzi spoke Italian, English, and French and was quite charismatic. The bank's owner, Luigi Zerosi, promoted Ponzi to bank manager. Zerosi may have been an inspiration for the young Ponzi. His bank offered an unheard of 6% annual returns on bank deposits. The bank had made bad real estate investments and therefore used money from new deposits to pay the interest on the old ones. The bank eventually failed and Zerosi fled to Mexico with bags of cash. Ponzi was now penniless and wanted to return to the US. Perhaps looking for work, he walked into the offices of a former Zerosi customer, Canadian Warehousing, and, finding no one there, wrote himself a check for $423.58 in a checkbook he found, forging the signature of a director of the company. He was caught, he pled guilty, and spent 3 years in jail in Montreal. After his release in 1911, he decided to return to the United States, but got involved in a scheme to smuggle Italian illegal immigrants across the border. He was caught and spent 2 years in prison in Atlanta. After leaving prison, he moved back to Boston and got married. He started an advertising company and failed, then managed his in-laws' fruit company, and it also failed. Wow, this guy's string of failures kind of reminds me of never mind. Anyway, Ponzi began writing European companies with offers to run ads for them in the US. One Spanish company replied, and in their letter they included an IRC. Here's where the infamous Ponzi scheme really starts, so pay attention. IRC stands for International Reply Coupon. An IRC was meant for a person in country A to send it to a person in country B, where they can be redeemed at the post office for stamps, which they can use to mail person A back. So essentially, person A pays for person B's postage. So where's the catch? Ponzi noticed that due to the weaker European currencies, he could buy IRCs in Europe and sell them in the States for a profit. The strategy is called arbitrage, and that's fine, nothing wrong with that. So step one is buy a lot of IRCs from Europe. Correction, step one is really get a lot of money to buy loads of postal IRCs. He turned to several banks in the Boston area to get a loan, but they all turned him down. Undaunted, Ponzi asked his friends for a loan and promised a 50% return in 45 days. He told them that his IRC arbitrage plan was such a cash cow that he could easily afford to pay out such high returns on their investments. And sure enough, they were promptly paid on time with money he got from new investors. The Ponzi scheme was born. In January of 1920, the first 18 people invested $1,800 in his company. As word spread of his incredible return rate, more and more investors flocked to Ponzi. By February, investments totaled $5,000. By March, $25,000. He even hired agents who would pick up investors from Maine all the way to New Jersey. By May, Ponzi raked in $420,000. By June, $2.5 million. In July, he was banking $1 million per week. At that time, the Boston Post wrote a positive article about Ponzi. The next morning, thousands of Bostonians had gathered at his office wanting to invest. By August, he was approaching $1 million per day. Even though money was pouring in, his business stated purpose was reselling those postal IRCs, and Ponzi still hadn't figured out how to convert IRCs to cash. Also, the profit margin on each IRC wasn't that big, so he would need an impossible amount of them to legitimately pay back the investments. For example, to profit on the original 18 investors, he would need 53,000 IRCs. And if he wanted to pay the next 15,000 investors, he would need several Titanic-sized ships full of IRCs. Clearly impossible, but in the meantime, investments were paid off with new investments, and most people chose to reinvest their earnings back into Ponzi's company. Ponzi made the most of it by living big. He bought a mansion in Lexington, Massachusetts, and bought a locomobile, the finest car of that time. Ponzi bought a local bank and used it to give himself loans. He also bought a macaroni company and part of a wine company in an attempt to gain profits that could be used to repay the investors of his scheme. Yeah, that didn't work. Ponzi's rapid rise naturally drew suspicion. When a Boston financial writer suggested there was no way Ponzi could possibly deliver such high returns in a short period of time, Ponzi sued for libel and won $500,000 in damages. But Ponzi's scheme was starting to crack. Further suspicions caused a run on Ponzi's office, as some investors decided to pull out. Ponzi was totally chill and paid them all, and the run stopped. Soon journalists at the Boston Post started to take a hard look at Ponzi's operation. Sure, he was offering crazy high returns, but he wasn't actually doing anything with the money. Also, they estimated that he would need 160 million postal RSCs, while only 27,000 were in circulation. These critical articles caused another run on his company. He paid out $2 million in 3 days. Ponzi, being the charming dude he was, passed out coffee and donuts and assured everyone everything was A-OK. Yeah, but it wasn't okay. Things were very, very not okay. Massachusetts Bank Commissioner Joseph Allen started looking into Ponzi's activities and discovered that Ponzi's bank, Hanover Trust, had loaned loads of money to Ponzi's own bank accounts and that he was estimated at $7 million in debt. The final blow came on August 11, 1920. The Boston Post published a front-page story about Ponzi's criminal past in Montreal, including forgery and his involvement in the corrupt Zarozzi Bank. Ponzi had planned a last-ditch effort to borrow funds from the bank vaults to pay off his debt, but Bank Commissioner Allen prevented him by seizing Hanover Trust due to numerous irregularities. The news about Ponzi's bank brought down an additional 5 other banks. His investors were practically wiped out, receiving less than 30 cents to the dollar. His investors lost about $20 million, or about $242 million in today's dollars. Ponzi was charged with 86 counts of mail fraud and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He served only 3.5 years and then was released, where he was promptly rearrested for larceny, which he served about another 3 years. After he was released the second time, he moved down to Florida, where he happily retired. Haha, just kidding. He set up a real estate company that scammed people into buying swampland while promising 200% returns in 60 days. Once again, he was charged with fraud. He tried to flee the country by sneaking on board on a merchant ship bound for Italy, but he was caught and sentenced to 7 years in prison up in Massachusetts. In 1934, he was released and immediately deported to Italy. In Italy, he jumped from scheme to scheme and eventually wound up in Brazil, where he passed away in 1949. In conclusion, sure, Charles Ponzi was a thief and a scammer and ruined the lives of loads of people, but maybe we can be inspired to never give up, or always think positive. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please give it a big like. And also, don't forget to subscribe for more super cool videos.